Hi, everybody. Good morning. We are going to do our Q&A of the week, and we have found two very, very interesting themes this week in the questions that we have received. So thank you all so much for your amazing questions. The first one, like first theme, first question is centered around somatic work and why, I guess on some level, what we mean by somatic work and why is it so important? And I would say specifically for myself, it's really the idea that we start reconnecting with how our body is processing and experiencing things
Mhm,
because we are always so much up here.
mhm,
When we process stuff, when we think about the problems we're having, the struggles, the blocks, the anxiety, the trauma, we're always very rational about things. And sometimes we forget that really, our stomach is feeling nauseous about all this stuff, or our throat is clenching, the chest is getting tight. Like, how is everything else processing what's happening? And I think in somatic work, we really kind of reconnect to what's happening in the body, also because the body really does process a lot of stuff. Our nervous system is not just up here, our nervous system is really everywhere. And if anyone here has read The Body Keeps the Score,
mhm.
which is trauma specific, which we will get to in a second. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that it's so important to involve the body in the process because you really cannot separate body and mind anymore. What are your thoughts about this, Stephanie?
Yeah, I mean, Eliza, you covered it basically. So that's like the why of so when we experience something, it gets stored in our body. I mean, our bodies are processing it. So it's not just, a lot of the times people think that they can just think their way out of something. I can rationalize or talk my way out of something. But, no matter what you're able to process and move through in your mind, you've got a bunch of stuff stored in your body from whatever traumatic experience you had, or if you've had a panic attack, your body, gets used to
Mm-hmm.
what's the panic response. So doing somatic work is all about what's it's about noticing then, okay, what am I feeling, what am I experiencing, and then where is it in the body, and then how can we move it through the body, because a lot of the times what we're trying to do in just normal life is suppress it, and what you suppress just builds up basically. So in doing somatic work, we're using the body, but it's not just body stuff. It's using the body, like you said, Eliza, connected to the mind. So, like when we were talking about anger, was that last week or 2 weeks ago? I've lost track of the week.
It's every day of our
But
lives.
yeah, but talking about anger, like, yes, there's the whole emotional and cognitive, response to anger, like what has been violated in my person to create this anger, moving through all of that. But then there's all of this stuff in the body that needs to come out. So whether it's screaming or yelling or pounding fists, or having a tantrum, where you can just get it out of your body, or shake. I mean, a lot of the times, like with panic, I do a lot of shaking. If you just sit there and
Mm-hmm.
shake, and then it like mobilizes the energy through your body, and it gives it a way to move out. And a lot of the somatic work we do is intentional movement. Like it's not just, it's designed to help whatever's stuck in there move through. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the purpose of it. And I feel like no therapeutic process is complete without somatic work.
I couldn't agree
Just
more.
to sit and talk, like in a kind of traditional Freudian sense or whatever, like just to sit and talk. Like, I feel like there's only so much, this is just my own personal opinion, there's only so much you can really do talking through things. I think the body has to process and move through these things. So
Absolutely.
that's why it's so important to the work that we do.
It's so important, and this is also reminding me of the benefit of creative arts therapies, like when we do
Yes,
just talk therapy, we can lie to ourselves sometimes. I'm okay. I'm okay. And yet if I
exactly.
take the words out and I just make a sound or draw or move, you
Right,
can see I'm not okay, like
right.
it's going to come right through.
Exactly. I remember actually I had a client years ago. She was like Mensa. She was an actual genius, like a legitimate genius. And and the whole issue with her, she had had some trauma in her past, and it was always about her trying to talk her way out of it, or to, you know, and because that's the way that she is used to doing things, use the mind and use reasoning. And, you know, and I used to say to her, I don't think you can think your way out of this. Like, we need to process it. You need to feel it. You need, and I think when you're so used to just using your mind, and a lot of us do this, we just check out of our bodies because it's uncomfortable to be in our bodies a lot of the time. If you're feeling anger, who wants to be in a body that you're experiencing that, you know? Like, who wants to be in a body when you're experiencing panic and suddenly you get dry mouth and you know, your stomach is acting up and you feel like, I feel like, who wants to be in that body? So yeah, it's very easy to check out and then think you can think your way through it. And her major pivotal moment came when finally, and this was through a lot of work and a lot of just prepping to allow herself to come into her body. And once she did, it was so uncomfortable. And then we had to work through that. And that's really then where her evolution came. But, you know, for the first several months, all she wanted to do was talk her way out of things. And it wasn't enough. You know, reasoning and analyzing and all these kinds of things, very important for acknowledgement, for awareness. But then to actually make the lasting shifts, you need to incorporate the body.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything, every level needs to be included for healing. Otherwise, the head is over here, the body is over there.
Right. And never the twain shall meet. They're just doing their own things. And, you know, how are you going to function that way?
Exactly. And then, you know, this is actually kind of transitioning to the next question, which is about trauma. You know, when we think about things that are in the body, but we have forgotten up here, the body is the only way to then be able to process that.
Right.
And this question, which is one of my favorite questions, is how do I know that something that happened to me was trauma? And I think,
that's an interesting question.
Yeah. And I think it's really centered around, you know, the fact that the definition of trauma is constantly changing. It's constantly expanding. It's constantly evolving.
Right.
And we always talk about this and the fact that trauma, you know, we used to put so much emphasis on the event itself. And now we're finally coming to trauma is really how the nervous system responds to an event.
Right.
And so that's why I think luckily this is taking us out of deciding this is trauma and this isn't trauma. Oh, this was bad enough to be considered trauma, but this is really not all that bad.
Right.
It doesn't work like that. It's like, how have you reacted to this event?
Exactly. Yeah, actually, this is very interesting because so I have another client who she always minimizes what actually has been trauma in her life, because she's like, well, I was never raped. I was never, like, she categorizes these, you know, it has to be a main event. I had to have been in an accident. I had to, you know, something made. And basically she just has ongoing trauma with toxic relationships, an abusive relationship, you know, and like some parenting issues, you know, a mother who is very overbearing. But she's like, but it was still a good childhood, you know. Well, not based on all of the things that we've talked about that have been traumatic for you in your, you know. But she's like, well, it's not like a big enough deal to be called trauma. And yet, so my definition, just not like a clinical definition or anything, but my definition of this would be like, okay, all of these experiences though, that have affected you, that you're still holding, and that are maladaptive or pervasive enough to affect your life in a negative way right now, that is trapping you from being embodied or being, you know, functioning in your everyday life the way you want to. That's trauma. You know, it's trapped in there and it needs to be processed and worked through so you can live your most embodied life. So it doesn't matter if you think, well, it, you know, again, like I wasn't raped, I wasn't in an accident. It's not a big deal. It's just my mom was overbearing and breathing down my neck for the first 18 years of my life to practice piano, you know, and yeah, that can be really traumatic.
Absolutely.
Even though on the outside it looks like, oh, but she seemingly seemed like a great mom, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And that denial response, you know, the I have to minimize and I have to, that even comes from some people with the biggest categories like, oh, is rape really trauma? I mean, one of my colleagues was telling us about a patient who said, because he was doing his assessment, he's actually a laryngologist, and he was asking her, hey, have you had any trauma? Maybe that could be linked to this voice problem you have. And she said, well, does rape count as trauma? She said something like, yeah, I was raped recently, but does that count?
Wow.
So it's amazing, you know, it's amazing the level of denial that people need sometimes to get through. The problem is denial doesn't allow you to heal. Denial is a band-aid over a gushing wound. So
yeah. We need to be able to acknowledge all of this, everything that's happened to you, even if you don't think it could be, you know, classically called trauma. Has it affected you in a way that's, you know, really holding you back or holding you in or trapping you or imprisoning you, and you're stuck there? And you think about it, and, you know, and even if you don't think about it, but it affects the way that you function now,
absolutely.
then yes, you need to acknowledge that.
Absolutely.
No matter what anybody else would categorize it as, you know?
Yeah. And that's why I'm so glad that we constantly expand this definition of trauma. Yeah. So thank you all very much. We are so grateful for your questions.
Great
Keep
questions.
them coming.
Yeah. We'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time.